Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 12th chapter in the book of Job. This launches Job's fourth response, or his fourth speech, and it comprises 3 chapters. Now, the first time we heard from Job was in his first monologue was the 3rd chapter, when, long story short, he is inflicted with the devastation literally without any precedent or parallel in human experience. He lost his health, he lost his wealth, he lost his family, he had skin boils on him all of a sudden, inexplicably and for no clear purpose. So some of his friends, who are identified in the by name in the 11th chapter of the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter, gather and they mourn with him in prolonged silence. Then Job breaks out, and then we hear from these friends in the order in which they appear. Eliphaz the Nemanite gives his speech in the 4th and 5th chapter. Then Bildad the Shuhite, we hear from him next. In between is Job. And we finally hear from Zophar the Naamanite in the 11th chapter. And as we explained during the conclusion, the tail end, even after the verse-by-verse commentary analysis, that Zophar's, the contents of his speech are instrumental in influencing, informing, and shaping Job's response. So the 12th chapter, Job affirms the greatness of divinity, which Eliphaz accuses him in the 5th through 10th verse of having an ignorance of. We're actually going to read it from the top in the order in which they appear. The first is when he establishes his guilt, or he accuses him of having guilt, and this shapes the 13th chapter, which comes after this. We'll probably comment on that slightly more extensively in the lesson which comes after this lesson, and we've already done the 11th chapter. But in Zophar the Naamanite answered and said, should a multitude of words go unanswered, and should a man by the words of his lips be justified? Should your babbling silence men, and should you mock, and no one make you ashamed, since you have said, my discourse is flawless, and I have been clean in your eyes? So his imperfection, his mortality, his finiteness forms the foundation. Job is an imperfect, incomplete, limited in his power and his cognitive capacities, and that forms the foundation for the comparison, or which there is no comparison between him and divinity. But if, 5th verse, this is the section itself, but if only Eloah would speak and open his lips against you, and show you the secrets of wisdom, doubling your doubling your ability, knowing then that Eloah forgets your wickedness for you. Would you find out Eloah by searching, or search out the end of Eloah? It is higher than the heavens, what would you do? Deeper than the grave, what would you know? Their measure is longer than the earth, and broader than the sea. He passes through and shuts up, and gathers, and then who reverses it? So if he would but silence himself and confess and admit his imperfections and his ignorance, he would be able to hear the voice of the one to whom he was petitioning for the answer and explanation for why this suddenly happened to him. And in the end, Yahweh does not give Job an explanation. He just gives him he rewards him with twofold of what he had taken, and just gives him a discourse on his awesome might. But the secrets, the revelations, the mysteries are the privilege and power of having access to the mysteries that we do, especially in the new covenant, double our abilities. It multiplies them manifold. And he's saying you can search. The 7th verse should not be interpreted as a discouragement against searching and investigating and trying to seek all that you can find out and know about Elohim, but it's just to say that any attempt to conduct an exhaustive investigation is fleeting and self-defeating from the start, because there is literally no end. And he describes the unlimited and infinite dimensions, higher than the heaven, deeper than the grave, whether above or below. He transcends it. A measure is longer than the earth, so the earth cannot contain the infinitude of his grandeur. The earth is but a pale blue dot in his universe, which is not quite infinite, but close as far as physical space allows. But on this tiny pale blue dot, he has elected to, this is the cosmic struggle of good and evil on this pale blue dot. And if he passes through, now Job earlier said in an earlier response that he passes through, I do not discern him. But if he passes in through and then reverses it, so we are powerless to resist or reverse any decree or ultimatum or commandment that he commands to nature. We are fragile, fleeting, mortal, and weak. He is omnipotent, omniscient, and capable of being everywhere at once. So in the 13th verse, he tells him, if you would prepare your heart and stretch out your hand towards him, if wickedness were in your hand, put it far away, and do not let perverseness dwell in your tents, then indeed you shall lift up your face without spot, and you shall stand firm and not be afraid. So this is the section in the chapter when he implores Job to repentance. This influenced the 14th chapter in Job's response. So Job's response is in fact 3 chapters, but sin does create a distance between the enabling access and the answers to our prayer. This is communicated in Proverbs 15:29, John 9:31, and Isaiah 59:1-2. You can look up those. But if you do all these things, if you repent, and then your life will be brighter than noon, and you would soar upward, you would be like the morning. And you shall trust, because there is hope. And when you shall have searched out, you shall lie down in safety, and you shall rest, and you will know what makes you, and no one would make you afraid, and many shall seek your favor. So there's a few things that he can expect. He can expect a dawnness of a new day, a new lease on life, a new outlook and approach in the night. Everything is new, everything is morning. It is the dawn of a new day when we repent, and our trust and our confidence and our hope will be restored because we repent, and we will have rest, and we will live without fear. So these are the blessings. But the eyes of the wicked are consumed, and they shall not escape, and their hope is the breathing out of life. So there is the opposite end of the same coin. If you are wicked, you are not entitled, you do not deserve, you do not merit these blessings. Now the opening verse, 12th chapter itself, and before we delve into reading the first verse, we just want to make plain that the pattern in these next 3 speeches follow a similar pattern to what we've already read and witnessed in a lot of Job's speeches, where he addresses the humans and then he addresses divinity, but he is in their presence. He is with earshot in them. And as in any case of criminal suspect, because he is a criminal suspect in their book, anything you say can and will be used against you. So it's important to read these chapters in tandem. We can only focus on one at a time, but just to understand the dynamics of what shapes and influences the responses and the counter rebuttals and the rebuttals. So opening verse, and Job answered and said, so same thing I do before I read every introductory verse, which launches a newly named speaker, or an already named speaker, in this case Job. It's not going to be a newly named speaker until Elihu. He is younger, and his speech or monologue comprises chapters 32 through 37. But how would you imagine that he answered them? So he had said all these 3 things to them, and he addresses them, not in the order in which he does, but beginning in the 7th verse especially, he affirms the greatness of his power. But before he does that, he says a few things. He has to get a few things off of his chest. He resorts to sarcasm for the first time in the 2nd verse. Truly you are the people, and wisdom should die with you. So he's humoring them. This isn't an accurate or honest evaluation of them. He's speaking in sarcasm because their wisdom is powerless to not only provide an answer to him, but also to provide tangible healing and solution. Wisdom can bring perspective, but it cannot necessarily bring healing. But that's exactly what he needed. He didn't need to be libelously charged with, accused of, without evidence of having some secret sin. That's the only way that it entered into their minds that this suffering was merited. All suffering on earth is merited from divine displeasure for forsaking and disobeying and sinning. But I, like you, have a heart too. I am not less than you, and who does not know such as these? So he's saying he has a heart, but it's not entirely clear whether his friends have a real heart, because they're not being very friendly to him. They are accusing him without evidence, and it stems from a heartlessness. So their problem was too much mind, not enough heart. They thought they had all the answers. They came with their prefixed theological prejudices, which categorically excluded even the possibility that the righteous can suffer to the extent that Job did. But they do not have the heart for ministry. They have the mind for theology, and a lot of the stuff they say does seem consistent and correct with Deuteronomy and the book of Proverbs. But he says, you're not better than me. I'm not better than you. Just because I'm suffering doesn't mean that I am worse than you as a person. It just means I'm worse off than you at this moment in time. I have become a laughingstock to my friends, one who has called on Eloah, and he answered him. A laughingstock is the righteous, the perfect one. So he's reduced to a figure of fun, a species of ridicule, someone that is a laughingstock, just means someone who is laughed at for their expense. They could see his calamity, and you'd kind of have to have a sick sense of humor to find anything funny about what happened to Job. But we Christians are to be laughingstocks. We look silly, we look foolish when we proclaim his name and just live in observance to these principles we abide by. But we have to embrace being laughed at, ridiculed, and reproached. This is a benign persecution, which is the mandatory minimum for the persecution we can endure on his behalf. But, he feels neglected, abandoned, and empty and forsaken by Eloah. That's the singular tense of Elohim. He does not have answer, but he's convinced that he is innocent, that he is righteous, and that word perfect does not mean sinless. It just Yahweh himself used that word to describe Job to Satan in 1:8. So he was upright and blameless in all his ways. He wasn't perfect in the sense that he was sinless, but he was as perfect as one could be in the mortal frame. A lamp is despised in the thought of one who is at ease, prepared for those whose feet slip. So, when you're on top of the world, you can despise someone who is on the bottom. You can make all these excuses and accusations without evidence that, they're just bums. They have no one to blame but themselves for their lot in life. But that's not the right thing to do. That's not the righteous thing to do. There is such a thing as being rich and righteous. You don't have to treat people who are less fortunate than you like they are inferior beings and they have no one to blame but themselves. Of course, it's an oversimplification to suggest that all the miseries of the poor can be directly attributed to the rich, but we don't want to comment further on that line of thought. The tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke El are complacent to him who brings Eloah in his hands. So the robbers, these are the wicked, these are the thieves. The adversary himself is likened to a thief and robber in John 10:1 and 10, and they are at peace. They shouldn't be at peace because they live by war, they live by the sword, yet they are flourishing in the world. And Job sees his own miserable, degraded condition, convinced of his righteousness, and he sees the people out there, the robbers who are at peace. They have the peace of mind and state of serenity that he lacks and wants and longs to recover. They are provoking El, but they are complacent, and complacency is a sin, especially as the end times approach. We cannot be indifferent to the machinations which are hostile to the flourishing of Christianity, which are in motion right now. But now ask the beast, and they teach you, and the birds of the heavens, and they declare it to you. So nature is a lesson, and Solomon makes note of some of the lessons that ants teach. He encourages the reader of Proverbs in the 6th chapter to take note of the ants, for they are wise. So what Job does is the beast and beast are certainly have more cognitive capacity than ants, but ants do operate according to a wise, predetermined design. They're governed by instinct, but beasts and birds, they cannot disobey the nature of their intended nature. So it is impossible for animals to sin because they don't have rational or moral capacities. Or speak to the earth, and it teaches you, and the fish of the sea inform you. Natural revelation is a valid form of deducting observations which are applicable to divinity. The existence of creation is a testimony of truth to the nature of the Creator. So we find himself in the earth, and it can teach us. And fish, the same as birds and beasts, there is some lesson that they can impart. It's not immediately obvious, but if you look long enough and study hard enough, you will profit from something that they teach to you. Of course, they cannot teach explicitly. We have to open with the mindset of learning from them. Who among all these does not know that the hand of Yahweh has done this? So that is the only time in chapters 3 through 37 that the name of Yahweh is used. It is used in the prologue, the one who's in the heavens, but the author of Job is not the same person as the human protagonist. Whoever wrote this book, it almost certainly was not Job, but that is the covenant name of Israel. So it's somewhat confusing for him to apply the name that which they specially related to him to all the animals, because of all the nations on earth, they were the only one who knew this name. Job was an Edomite, but he is a Jew by belief, if not necessarily blood. In whose hand is the life of all that live, and in the breath of all mankind. So as the creator of life, he is the source and the sustainer of life. The power of life and death it lies in his sovereign jurisdiction. So everything that lives, whether the beasts, the birds, the sea, the microbacteria, the plants, et al., etc., including us, we owe our life to him, and the breath of all mankind, that is how we were created. That's how we were given life. In Genesis 2:7, the ruah, which is the Hebrew word for spirit, is semantically similar to breath. So the spirit of life was breathed into Adam, and it has been with us ever since. Does the ear not try words, and the mouth taste food for itself? So ears are, the sensory capacity of ears are hearing, and that we have to judge and discern and discriminate and uplift and exalt certain words and judge them accordingly to their merits, much in the same way that a mouth, which has the sensory capacities of taste, would taste food to determine what is good, what should be swallowed, what should be absorbed and digested. So we have to weigh the spirits or test them, as John writes in the first verse of the 4th chapter in the first epistle, which bears his name. With the aged is wisdom, and understanding with length of days. So it is an oversimplification to suggest that those who live to an elderly age will automatically have the abundance of wisdom, that they are not, wisdom comes from strenuous effort. So if you make it to a ripe old age in life, but you do not apply yourself to diligent study, then wisdom will escape you. But as a general principle, the older we are, the wiser we are. And because he is eternal, that means there is no limitation to his wisdom. So our lives are as nothing. If we are lucky, we can make it to the age of 80, but that is as nothing in eternity. So with the aged, with the eternal, comes the ultimate value of wisdom. And understanding will increase the longer you live. Hopefully that means you're making the most of life, because life is a school through which we deduct and deduce truths. With him are wisdom and might, and he has counsel and understanding. So the him is Yahweh, who wisdom originates from, finds its fullest and most thorough and complete expression in him, as well as might. He is an omniscient and omnipotent being. Those are the attributes, respectively, of infinite or unlimited intelligence and infinite or unlimited strength. And we cannot, no human can counsel him or presume to advise him, because we have nothing to teach him. He does not take, we cannot manipulate him from his sovereign will. But he does have a perfect understanding, so everything he does is geared and oriented towards a wise and perfect design. Look, he breathes down, and it is not rebuilt. If he imprisons a man, there is no release. So this ties into an observation earlier made by, what's his name? I gotta look this up. Zophar, sorry. That the might and the machinations of divinity are irreversible and irresistible. So Job says much the same thing. What he tears down, no man can rebuild. What he destroys, that means it is meant to be destroyed, and there's no human help that can be gifted towards the reconstruction of a city or a house or a life or anything else. And if he imprisons a man, there is no release. Now, he does not imprison us. Sin is what imprisons us, and we are released from the bondage of the prison of sin. And there is no prison worse in the world than in the prison of an unforgiving heart. So that is one of the benefits and blessings of being redeemed. We are able to forgive others and overlook things which used to cause us offense and doesn't anymore. Look, he withholds the waters, and they dry up, and he sends them out, and they overwhelm the earth. So the water is under his command and control, the seas of the earth, the rivers too, fresh water, salt water, whatever. This planet has water, unlike, I think, they may have found ice on Mars, but, our life, water is essential. It is not a life form, but it is the wellspring and source of life. Without water, life on earth as we know it could not exist. But that is all because he gave it to us, and he can overwhelm the earth. He did it with the flood in the days of Noah. But we have the promise that he will never destroy humanity again in that way. With him are strength and ability. The misled and misleader are his. So he has strength and ability. There is no impossibility. We cannot impose any impossibility on what he can or cannot do. With him, all things are possible. Luke 18:27 and 1:37, and also somewhere in Matthew 19. But there is no cap or limitation that we can impose. Either we shouldn't even imagine that there is some limit or something that he can or cannot do, and whether we mislead others by telling him that the Bible is not true, it's just a metaphor, then you are his and you belong to him. And if you doubt and mislead others with the word that you are entrusted to, then you remain his to do what he wills with you. And the consequences of teaching and leading others astray are rightly multiplied in proportion to the average or ordinary disciple. He leads counselors away stripped and makes the judges go mad. So this ties into something else. Job says in an earlier chapter that why does judge injustice flourish across the judicial systems in the earth? And it must be because Yahweh or El Shaddai is the one who's making them do it. But it is really Satan who leads to the judicial insanity in the world. So much of our justice system is a contradiction in words. This is not only true in America, but indeed across the world. They are sources of injustice rather than justice in a lot of cases. He loosens the bonds of kings and binds a girdle on their loins. So kings owe their position to his sovereign grace. No one can sit on a throne who has not been raised there. And a lot of kings lack this awareness, but Job certainly had it. Even though he wasn't a king, he was a man of some influence and respectability, perhaps the leading merchant in the town of Uts from whence he hailed, who leads away priests as a spoil and overthrows the mighty. So priests, the Jewish Levitical system, they had a priesthood, but priests were nothing unique to the Hebrew people. There were priests in every religion and culture, but the same as kings, they have to answer to Yahweh, and he's going to discard them. And just like the mighty, the ones who are oppressive, the ones who exploit their advantages of power will be overthrown because they are not as mighty as the Almighty, not even close. Turning aside the lips of the trusted one and takes away the discernment of the elders. So there's a dichotomy and a qualitative chasm between human wisdom and justice and divine wisdom and justice. And the injustice, as Job saw it, of being afflicted with the loss of the health and those wealth in his family was an injustice, but he couldn't understand it. But eventually all does make sense. We start to see it more when Yahweh gets the word after his friends are done exchanging their monologues. And we have the gift of hindsight, pouring scorn on nobles and loosens the girdle of the strong. So there is a reversal in the earthly economy when the King of Kings intervenes and intermingles. He reverses the order. The scorn, the nobles are the ones who can walk with their head on high, but he pours scorn on them. So those who are exalted on the earth are debased and diminished in his economy, in his kingdom. And the strong, their source of strength, are loosened. So their source of strength is ultimately relying on something external, that being the loosing of the girdle, but also something eternal and heavenly, revealing deepness out of darkness, and he brings the shadow of death to light. So he is not only the creator and controller and sustainer of life, but he is also a god of death. The power of life and death lies in his hands. So he reveals what hell is like, and he does give us all the information we need to know about hell. It is a very real possibility, and Job feels like he's on the edge of hell. He has no hope for heaven or anything else. And in an earlier chapter, he just prays for one more hour, free from the torment, before he takes him to the land of shadow, the valley of the shadow of death. Making nations great, and he destroys them, spreading out the nations, and he leads them out. So if human history teaches us anything, is that whatever empire was once omnipotent no longer is. All the empires of all the ages have fallen. They have risen and fallen and die and live by sovereign grace. And as Americans, as the present possessors of the hegemony, which must be preserved and protected, we have to realize that we can only flourish in as much as we remain faithful. That is the secret to our success, and the reason why we have flourished in the geopolitical chessboard is because we have been faithful. But as we deracinate from the fundamental facets of the founding of our nation and even its colonial existence, we were a nation founded on faith, then we're going to lose the mandate of heaven, and after the age of America is the age of the anti-Messiah. Turning aside the heart of chiefs of the people of the earth, and he makes them wander in pathless waste. So without him as the center of your mind and the center of your life is going to be a maze. You're going to be walking about to and fro with no guidance, no direction on the broad on the broad path to death, destruction, and damnation. You are going to wander like a sheep without his shepherd once you lose communion and contact with the good shepherd, who leads us not into temptation but delivers us from the evil one. They grope in darkness, having no light, and he makes them stagger like a drunkard. So without the light, the one who is light, exuded, and embodied, then all you have is darkness. This is analogous to the confusion and doubt of a sin-stained existence. And when you have no light, you have no hope. And what do we read of in the new Jerusalem, new heaven, and new earth, that there will be no need for a sun or moon or lamp, because he will be the light. So his light is more than sufficient. The sun is ultimately supplementary, and the moon too. But when he is in his full uninhibited radiance, then his life is more than sufficient. But without that light, we're going to be staggering about to and fro, walking incoherently, incoordinately, as a drunkard. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you. Take care until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.